Welcome to a Simple Therapy podcast. Real conversations, brave stories, and simple, soulful insights for therapists and anyone on a healing journey. I'm Sindee Gozansky, licensed therapist, supervisor, and a fellow human figuring it out too. Around here, we believe healing doesn't have to be complicated, and that leading with your heart still matters. We talk about what it really means to be human in and out of the therapy room. You'll hear from therapists, mental health professionals, and people courageously sharing their personal healing journeys. Because whether you're the therapist or the client, we're all human here. Let's keep it simple and keep showing up. Hello and welcome to a Simple Therapy podcast. Today, I am truly honored to introduce our guest, Jonathan Kemp. Jonathan Kemp is a mental health advocate, entrepreneur, and creator of Smart Wisdom, a scientifically validated note-taking technique. Born into privilege as the future third Viscount Rochdale, he built careers in law enforcement and entrepreneurship. Unaware that bipolar disorder, depression, addiction, and dyslexia were shaping his life. His mental illnesses were not diagnosed until age 39, when he finally sought professional help. Jonathan went on to win the British Dyslexia Association's Entrepreneur of the Year award in 2011. He shares his inspirational journey through mental illness and the power of self-awareness, resilience, and asking for help in his new compelling memoir, Finding Peace of Mind, to be released on October 10th. We're going to hear all about that. A perfect day off for him is dim sum with friends in Chinatown, London, followed by a stroll in St. James Park, and back up to Soho for coffee and a slice of dark chocolate cake. I'm so excited to hear about that. Jonathan is coming to us from London. I'm here in Maine, and really excited and honored that you're here. So welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you very much indeed for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. So as we get started, and you have the beautiful copy of your book in the background, you've really lived through extremes like this privilege and power, extremes of illness and addiction. You know, most of my audience are therapists or people in the mental health world and people who have experienced their own mental health issues or family as such. And so you've really kind of compiled your experiences in such a vulnerable way and shared with people like practical advice, tools, ways to help other people. And it seems like it's become a mission for you, even though you have this like really varied life history. I mean, I read you were a police officer, you were in law enforcement, you were a cowboy in Australia, you are a professional businessman. So I don't even know where to start with this.
Yes, well, COVID for me was another big education. So I've had mental health issues since I was a young boy. I had no idea what was going on. I almost pretty much dropped out of school. I got poor grades. I didn't go to university. I was a punk rocker, you know, and I just didn't care really. And then after I left school, I knew there was something wrong. And I think probably after I worked on building sites, worked in restaurants, did various jobs. And then I got this opportunity to go to Australia, and I worked as a jackaroo, which is the American equivalent as a cowboy. And I did that for a year. And that was probably one of the best years of my life. It was absolutely amazing. The Australian outback, it's very different. Where I was, it was completely flat, but you start to appreciate different things. And but by this, sorry, you're going to say.
Yeah, was it a best year because of like a respite in your mental illness, like to being out there in nature and that kind of environment?
No, so the mental health issues were still there. And some days it was better than others. So one of the effects of bipolar for me was like a constant interference in the head. It was like constant sort of negative chatter. And I would try and counterbalance that with, you know, continually saying things in my mind or trying to direct my thinking. The reason it was so good, I think it didn't change how I felt internally, but I greatly appreciated what I was seeing, and I greatly appreciated the friendships that I made. And I was really lucky. I worked with some great people, and I very nearly didn't come back. And when I did come back, I then thought, God, I wish I'd stayed. Yeah. So anyway, that would have been another journey.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So and from that point on, I started to make a real effort rather than fighting the system, which is what I'd done at school and after school. I wanted to sort of sort myself out, do the best I can. And that's the approach I took in the police. I left. Mm-hmm. I then went to do postgraduate study. I skipped degree because of my police management experience. I did a master's in international finance, trade and shipping. I'd learned to speak to a sort of good intermediate level, 2 Chinese dialects. I was thinking about going to work in China. And all the time, I was really trying to find solutions to what was going on in my head. And I thought it was something external, like, I hadn't made enough money. I hadn't tried hard enough at work. I was in the wrong job. I hadn't got a degree. I wasn't exercising the right way. I wasn't exercising enough. I wasn't eating the right things. And so I sort of I wasn't, spiritual enough. So I was in 12-step programs, probably which your audience are aware of, for on and off for maybe 20 years, 15, 20 years. Mm-hmm. And I've got an addictive personality, and I more than qualify for probably every fellowship. And I thought, sorry, you're going to say?
In the 12 steps, every fellowship.
Yes. Yeah. And I thought if I work the 12 steps, to a really high degree, then that'll be the solution. And eventually, I was having problems, throughout this period, but as I sort of ticked each thing off, I was running out of options. But the one thing, although I didn't know what was wrong, what I did know was that there was no way I was going to see a doctor, and absolutely no way would I see a therapist, because in my head, that was a sign of weakness and it was a sign of defeat.
Yeah. So much here. Thank you for sharing this with us. It's something people listening can definitely resonate with, from the experiences of mental illness, from sharing like that constant noise and trying to, debate the negative self-talk, and sharing that like you learn 2 dialects of Chinese or Mandarin with dyslexia. Like that blows me away. And so then, of course, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with my brain? I can learn, and yet I can't do something simple or, hold X number of things in my mind in terms of tasks that need completion. So many people can really, really relate to this, including myself. With that, there was like a stigma to seek help. And does that come from like your background? Does that come from like, coming from a more privileged family, like we don't get help? Or what would you say for that?
I would say it's a combination of things. So I'd say my family background had something to play with it, some part to play. I had a sort of strange relationship with my family in that I told them as little as possible about what was going on with me. And I did that deliberately. Mm-hmm. So I think my family, the family dynamics had something to do with it. I think the unspoken and sometimes spoken expectation of, what I should achieve and, what I should be doing against what I was actually doing, and that sort of mismatch. I think that I realized probably during COVID, so a long, long time later, that was having a considerable effect on me. And I think also it was just a generational thing. So, like, I was in my teens during the late 70s. Therapy had sort of started in the UK, but it was a sort of thing that you talked about, under a hushed tone. It was some weird thing from California that probably hippies did. And psychiatrists, that was what those were the people that you would find in what we call nut houses, where all, insane asylums.
Yeah.
And you would talk about people with mental illnesses as nutters, lunatics.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are a lot of younger listeners here who have no idea that like that was really true. And I worked as a secretary in a place where they called it Nutball Hall. I mean, that's unfortunate, but these are truly our lived experiences. And there was a time when there was so much stigma, or it was just not even heard of. And then things like learning disabilities on top of it in the 70s, learning disabilities and ADHD, unheard of.
Yeah, I don't remember. I knew the word depression. I'd never heard of bipolar. So I was diagnosed when I was depression in my late 30s, bipolar in my early 40s. I'd never heard of bipolar. ADHD, I wasn't aware of that probably until about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. Dyslexia, I had no idea whatsoever until actually I started working for myself. So I was early 40s, and some people were saying, do you think you might be dyslexic? Because sometimes I sort of mix, even when I'm speaking, I mix sentences up. Mm-hmm. But when I was studying, I had no idea what the problem was, except that I would study time and a half to double time everyone up compared with everybody else to achieve the same result.
Yeah.
But the other interesting thing, actually, for your audience, and I only realized this relatively recently. So I was sort of aware that one of the causes of having a bipolar crash was stress. And so again, in my head, that sort of seems like a weakness because, I'm not affected by stress. But eventually, sort of 10 years after my diagnosis, and certainly during COVID, so this is nearly 20 years after my original diagnosis, I realized finally that stress really did trigger, particularly the bipolar crashes. Mm. And what happened at university was each time I got a piece of coursework, I would then get now looking back, I'd get really distressed because with the dyslexia would kick in. I can't do this. It's impossible. I don't understand it. I don't know where to start. And so I would sort of like get my coursework, crash. I'd be sort of floating along the bottom, but we had to produce the goods in a week or 2 weeks. And then after 3, maybe 4 days, I would then think, I've got it. Right. And then I'd go from not being able to do anything, I'm going to get a distinction. I'm going to get a distinction. And then I'd just take off again. And I did this for 2 years. I had no idea what was going on.
Right. Yeah. And so exhausting. And yet you knew you kind of had to wait for that next phase so that then you could, work so hard, whether it was hypomania or whatever. And also that desire to reach those high expectations. And I think what we're talking about too is why so many high functioning people don't even seek mental health help or support, because there's this beautiful stubbornness we have, or also that like, okay, I'll just do it. I'll just like grunt through it until I can, achieve the goal. Not reach out for help. You learn to reach out for help.
Yeah, what happened was I was late 30s, I think about 39. I'd been suffering badly from depression for years. And I reached another fork in the road. And probably I'd been at this point maybe 4 or 5 times in my life where, it's either call it a day or you've got to do something. Yeah. And I reached that fork in the road. And in my mind, I'd tried everything. And the only thing I hadn't tried was going to see a medical professional. And so with my tail between my legs, I went to see a therapist who was recommended. They diagnosed me with depression. I said, no, I haven't got it because I didn't know any different. I then saw another therapist who again diagnosed me with depression. I said, no, I haven't got it. They persuaded me to see a psychiatrist, but it took a year. Mm-hmm. And then it took another year for the psychiatrist and therapist to persuade me to start taking medication. But over that year, the psychiatrist asked me to track my moods. And it was only when I tracked my moods, so I'm sort of highly analytical and highly detail orientated. Mm-hmm. So I tracked them meticulously for a year, and I could see quite clearly if that was a sort of middle, if that was number 5, as you were, I'd occasionally go right up and then I'd come down almost vertically. Then I'd bounce along the bottom. Then I'd come up a bit, bounce along the bottom. And after a year, I realized, I can't fix this myself. No way. Yeah. And so I agreed to take medication. And initially I was put on antidepressants. And after probably about 3 months, mm-hmm. my brain started to clear. And I thought, oh my God, I was depressed. Wow. Because I didn't have any comparison. So suddenly when my brain cleared, I then started to understand where I'd come from, and that where I'd come from was depression. But because I'd known nothing else,
You know differently.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, this is really also gold, especially for us as clinicians, to hear what it's really like from that lived experience. I mean, I hear you saying, I was bouncing on the bottom. If I'm meeting with somebody who has bipolar, and I've worked with many people like that, the way you describe that, like, that's visceral. Like, and that's so hard when you're bouncing on the bottom, or when you didn't know there was another way to be except for depressed. And so it's really helpful to hear this, for sure.
Yeah. So what happened then was probably about another year later, again, I hit bottom again. I'd gone to meet someone at a local, we call them tubes. We have like an underground system in London. It's called the tube system. And I'd gone to meet someone at one of these stations, and they'd said something to me and walked off. Out of the station, we were going to go for something to eat. And in my brain, I just flipped in my brain, and I was like seething. But whenever I had this sort of instant reaction, I would never talk about it. And so I then went out of the station, and I deliberately walked in front of a bus. And the bus stopped, and then I deliberately walked in front of 2 taxis. Not that I particularly wanted to kill myself, but I was just so angry that, I sort of dared the bus driver to run me over, and the same with the 2 taxis. And 5 minutes later, I was sitting in a restaurant with this person, and I just thought, this is insane. And I spoke to friends, and I said, but I knew the bus was going to stop. And they said, how? And really, as a result of that, I then actually decided, on the recommendation of some friends, to actually go out to the US to a mental health facility for 4 weeks. And it was there that I was diagnosed with bipolar type 2. And that was, I was sort of early 40s.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Those are some hard memories to share, but it was pivotal for you, really.
Yeah, it took, I had to be in a desperate state to ask for help, mm-hmm. almost at each point. And even during COVID, I'd been on the same medication for about 20 years. And for me, I was on 2 medications. One was a mood stabilizer, and the second was an antidepressant to lift me up to sort of middle level. And it had stopped working maybe 10 years previously. So I was having highs, but it wasn't the sharp highs that I had pre-medication. These highs, they would literally last for months. I'd get focused on a work. It was almost always work. I'd get focused on a work project and I would just become like a laser beam, ignore everything to either side. And that's all I would do. I'd be getting up at ridiculous hours. I'd be working, long hours, working weekends, and I'd do this for months. And at some point, the stress would become so much, and it was usually finance related. I would then crash. For the first 2 weeks of a crash are the worst. It's like there's a sandstorm going on inside my brain, and it's sort of eating out my eyeballs. It's eating out my brain, and it's like storming around inside my head, grating against my skull. And that'll last for about 2 weeks. And the weird thing is that when it's going on, it's like it's never happened before. This is the first time. And I'm absolutely certain that it will never, ever stop. Even though I've got plenty of experience that it will, when I'm actually in it, I know it will never stop. And then after the first 2 weeks are usually the worst. And then the next 4 weeks, gradually things will start to level out. But what I was doing was I would focus 100% on work. Yeah. That's the way I managed to sort of drag my brain through this. And of course, once I got to the other side, that cycle would start again. I'd focused on the work and I was doing on usually some project, and then I'd start going up again.
Yeah.
And during COVID, I had 3 or 4 bipolar highs and crashes. And by the end of it, I was just finished.
Yeah. I mean, it's this level of like running yourself ragged and then going into that abyss that feels like you've never experienced it before. It's never going to end. Then it happens again. And I really think it's so crazy, but almost every interview and even many therapy sessions I have, we're still talking about the impact of COVID. Like, this is such a huge issue that it still has impacted people's lives, with trauma or whatever it is. And I really think it's important to not push it under. It really had powerful impacts. Yeah. So did you end up getting a better medication regimen so that you're not going into such highs and lows, or your own self-care tools that you've found work for you?
Yeah. So, and this is with the benefit of hindsight. So when COVID started, I thought, this is going to be easy. I know what shit feels like. I've had it all my life. This will be a walk in the park. What I hadn't factored into the equation was how important community was for me, and how I used community and people around me to sort of keep myself humming, as it were.
Yes.
And take that away, and I was just left with myself, and it was brutal. And it was absolutely brutal. I was depressed most of the time, although I didn't really recognize. I mean, I sort of knew it, because what would happen, I'd wake up in the morning and it would take 6 to 7 hours. So I usually got up about 6:30. If I did my morning routine, if I meditated, if I did a list to do, if I focused on the list, if I was lucky, sometime between 12 and 2, my brain might clear. Mm-hmm. But that was every day. Yeah. And and I had another crash. I can't remember. It was the last year of COVID, I think. So it's maybe 2021. I had another crash, and I was at my wit's end. So what I'd been doing, and again, this is with the benefit of hindsight, I was trying to self-manage it again. I mean, I was to the point that I had this really complex spreadsheet that took an hour to fill out every morning.
Wow.
And I was monitoring my moods 5 times a day, just trying to look for anything that might make a difference. And then I reached the end of my tether. And again, I reached the fork in the road. And I thought, I'm either going to call this a day because I've just had enough of it, or I'm going to do something. And I was in the process of a crash, and I just couldn't think what to do. And I'd actually started writing the book.
That's what I was gonna ask. When did you start? Was it during COVID?
Yes.
Amazing.
And I'd started writing it, and the section that I'd written was an emergency action plan. So what to do when I have a crash.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, I'm going to go and I'll dig that out. I couldn't remember what I'd put, but I knew I'd written it. And so I dug it out. And as I read it, my heart sank that I was committed. So number one was to keep an open mind and be willing. when I'm in a tough spot, the last thing I am is open-minded and willing.
Of course.
Yeah, I'd rather go and sit in a corner and just weather it out. Number two was to go and see the right medical professional. Mm-hmm. And number three was to take their advice. And I winced at each one because they're sort of contrary to, my natural inclination. But I thought, I'm going to do this. And that's what I did. I went to see my doctor. She referred me to a psychiatrist really quickly. I saw one within a couple of days. They recommended I change medication, which had happened numerous times, but I'd always refused. So I started that process. I did all sorts of things that I would never, ever have done. The doctor said to me, I want you to phone these mental health charities.
Did you know 1 in 5 people will experience a mental health issue this year? That's why I created Mental Health Threads, to spread awareness and break the stigma around mental health. At mentalhealththreads.etsy.com, you'll find a collection of inspiring and fun products, from t-shirts and hoodies to mugs, hats, candles, and more, all featuring positive messages that encourage self-care and mental well-being. Best sellers like Go to Therapy, Love Wins, and Still Here are fan favorites, along with our signature semicolon designs and Pride collection. Therapists especially love our exclusive items like Licensed Listener and Professional Secret Keeper. Our mission is to spark important conversations and remind you that you are not alone. If you're ready to make a statement and support mental health, head on over to mentalhealththreads.etsy.com today. Let's make mental health a priority together.
I've never found a charity in my life.
Right. And like a helpline.
Yes. So there were 2 helplines for suicide ideation and suicidal intention. And I phoned those and I spoke to them. And then there's, in the UK, we have there's probably a number, but one of the largest charities for bipolar is called Bipolar UK. And I contacted them and I saw they had weekly meetings in London, or monthly meetings, sorry. And so I started going. And then it took so I think I started changing meds probably about April. It was a really rocky road. The key thing is that I knew it to be the case, is that working out what medication is right is a very uncertain process. You've got a vague idea of what should work, but it affects everyone differently. So they started me on an antidepressant and mood stabilizer, so the combined. And after about 6 weeks, it was extraordinary. I completely lost the will to live. Just trying to get out of bed, it felt like I had a steel band over my body. And it was the Queen's Jubilee. And that we had a long weekend. Yes. And literally I was sort of living the week before about an hour at a time. I thought, can I live for another hour? And I'd write a list of things to do. And then I'd work my way through it. By the time I hit the Jubilee, it was, at times it was 5 minutes a time. And I'd be walking, along the street. I'd walk to, we've got various churches around here of different denominations. And I'm not religious in the slightest, but I would go in there just because it was quiet, it was peaceful, and I'd try and sit there and just, existing was a huge effort. So I put up with that for about 2 weeks. I went back to the doctor, and the psychiatrist actually phoned me at the weekend and said, stop that drug, or stay at where you are, don't increase it. And they added an antidepressant. And about 6 to 8 weeks later, like a miracle. It wasn't an effort to think. It wasn't an effort to breathe. It wasn't an effort to walk. It wasn't an effort to get up. It was like a complete and total miracle.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it's so gutting to hear what you went through and that pain of existing. And yet you have this inner strength and resilience of, okay, I'm going to write this list for 5 minutes, try to just, be here for another 5 minutes, another hour. And that fortitude ends up coming out also in your memoir. I'd love to talk a little bit about that. Finding Peace of Mind. What a great title. And with your experiences, you found like your own personal foundations, your own resilience, your own, like, I guess, like mini habits or like a mini recipe that you found helped you that you're sharing with others. So I think some of it you've already expressed a little bit, like those 3 steps. Also making a list to just like get you through, phoning helplines. What are some of these other tools that you offer that worked for you that you want other people to know about?
Yeah. So the reason I wrote the book, and it helps to close a loop.
Yes.
So I'd always been obsessed without consciously acknowledging it, because again, I'm not obsessed by anything. I was obsessed by lots of things, and I wouldn't really admit it. But one that I sort of knew, but I didn't know, was this idea of accumulating wealth. And in my head, wealth is money, or it's like some prestigious something or other. And during COVID, at some point, I realized actually I can self-define what wealth is to me. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, well, what is it sitting here today, age 60 and a bit? What is it? What wealth do I have that I could sort of like pin my hat to or put my hat on? And I thought, well, actually, it's my knowledge of mental health and neurodiversity. I've got 50 years worth of knowledge. 20, 25 years of trying to figure both of these things out myself, and then 20, 25 years of getting professional help. Yeah. So that's a huge wealth of knowledge. And that sort of made sense to me. And it also made sense to the sort of competitive side to me as well. 50 years, that's quite a lot. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, okay, well, what's success, which is something else that's driven me. I was about to say driven me bonkers, which is probably not the most politically correct word.
Yeah.
But, I thought, well, success for me is doing what I can to put my knowledge into the public sphere to benefit others. And when I'd figured those 2 things out, that was, again, a really substantial mind shift. But I wasn't prepared to write it. I certainly wasn't prepared to finish it, and definitely wasn't prepared to publish it unless I had a period of mental stability, which, thank goodness, the last, it's nearly 3 years now, I've had it. So I was writing the book, and initially I was just doing the memoir, and probably therapists would understand this. One thing that was crucial for me, I didn't want any self-pity in there. I didn't want to have any resentment in there. And I got both a male editor, copy editor, and a female copy editor. And I asked them both, please, can you highlight if any of this comes across? And then as I was writing it, I thought, actually, where I can also add value is because, I'm highly analytical, and all the time I'd be reviewing, does this work? Does that work? How can I tweak this? How can I tweak that? And I thought, what I do when I read a book, I'll look for all the tips and everything. I'll mark off the pages, and then I'll try and sort of figure out how it all fits together. And I thought, actually, what I would like to do for my readers is put it into one section. So, for example, you mentioned the foundations. I've got like 14 foundations, which I apply, sometimes more than others, but these are what help me to keep a balance. Mm-hmm. They don't mean I can stop taking medication or I can stop getting professional medical help, but what because, I have a mental illness, and for the illnesses that I have, medication, it is the only solution.
Sure.
But what they do is that when things are right, they give a much better quality of life. So for me, and the other thing I wanted to do was, and it was sort of bringing out some of the elements that I'd learned in 12-step foundations, was basically, this is my experience, strength and hope. Take what you like, leave the rest, and adapt to what you do want to take.
Yes, I do hear echoes of the fellowship as you're talking about this, not having the self-pity and resentment in there. Mm-hmm.
And so the foundations, they were things like, really simple. Number one for me is sleep. Mm-hmm. If I don't sort that out, then everything else sort of becomes much more of an effort. So I need about 8.5 hours sleep a night. And gradually over the years, I found sort of ways of enhancing it. And I talk about these sort of steps I've taken. So things like blackout blinds. I don't have a laptop in my bedroom. I leave my phone outside. I also have, what do you call it? With the sunshine and the clouds. What's it called? Where dark, gloomy weather, winter weather has an effect.
Oh,
seasonal affective disorder. That's it.
Right. The seasonal affective disorder, needing the light. Yeah.
So I have an alarm in my bedroom which has a sort of mimics daylight, and before the alarm goes off, the light starts to light up the room, and then I set my mobile 10 minutes later, and I stick that in the corridor.
Mm-hmm. Wow, you are very committed to your sleep hygiene. That's beautiful.
Yeah, that's crucial. Yes. And then things like, community. So making an effort to be around people. Mm-hmm. And when I'm with people, so I was like with a friend today, and I've known this person for 30 years. And they've helped me a lot in my work. And so when I'm with someone, to treat that person in that moment as the most important person in my life, really listen to them and just try and be there. And sometimes I'm good at it and sometimes not. And not to look at my mobile when I'm with them, even if they go to the loo, not to look at my mobile because it will just distract me.
Yeah, yeah.
Really so there are a lot. Sorry, you were going to say.
Oh, yes. You really come from a place of service, like even the way you're writing the book to help others, and that heart of being present when you're with a friend. Really, it's like so heart-led, so service-oriented, that seems to echo a little bit of your careers, even in law enforcement. I mean, that's service, and your business. And we're going to also talk about smart wisdom. We're getting there. But that's something that has really helped so many people. Like, you're all about helping people, Jonathan.
Yeah, I sort of realized during COVID that actually didn't matter where I was in the world. So I went to, so after the medication got sorted, about 4 months later, I went to Vietnam for 6 weeks. I've never been on a holiday on my own, never been away for that long. And so it was like a sort of treat, a real treat. But what I realized when I was in Vietnam was all the things that I enjoy here in London is exactly what I enjoy in Vietnam. I'm a photographer. I enjoy photography. So I was doing that. I enjoy talking to people. So I was doing that. I enjoy just looking at beautiful things, whether it's nature or it's the sunlight or it's cloud formations. And I was doing that as well. And so what made the holiday good was a continuation of the things that I was doing here in London to make my quality of life good on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. That's such an important point, because you're sharing so much of the self-awareness of like what to do when you need to add more health. But there's also this self-awareness of what are those things that just light you up, that you can bring more into your world wherever you are. And that's so important. And we need that because we do get distracted. We get like just so frenzied. We forget, oh, just, how do I focus and see something beautiful around me, or focus on a friend and put the phone down.
Something else I was going to say, it might come back to me. But...
Well, let's shift just a little bit, because with your memoir, Finding Peace of Mind, that's coming out on October 10th. It's going to be so exciting. You have these amazing gifts in the memoir itself. So tell us a little bit about the book, the proceeds, and how Smart Wisdom, maybe tell us what Smart Wisdom is and how it is also inside that book.
Sure. So I'm a salesman. If one is an entrepreneur, to be successful, you need to be able to sell. And that was another journey for me. And what I didn't want to do with the book, I didn't want to feel that like I didn't want other people to feel that I had an ulterior motive. I was just doing all of this to make lots of money and so on and so forth. So what I decided was that all profits from the book for the first year will go to 4 mental health charities. Mm-hmm. And what that does is that frees me to be quite, up and forward and motivated about promoting the book for the benefit of others, because there is no financial gain for me. And I felt very comfortable doing that. And then the other thing that I decided was, you've talked about Smart Wisdom. So Smart Wisdom is a note-taking technique that I developed when I was studying. I started off with other note-taking techniques and they worked, but there were quite a few tweaks that I made to make them even better. And then it became my business, for people who work in knowledge-intensive environments, so like banks, law firms, consultancies. And I would train them to use this technique, particularly in meetings or when they're interviewing people, or if they're doing any form of coaching. And also I'd train students, at university, either doing an undergraduate or a postgraduate. The teaching of students I found particularly delicious. Because it just really resonated, with the challenges of studying. And the courses where I was teaching Smart Wisdom, a lot of the students were like from overseas, so English was a second language, and just that helping them to sort of, study better. So Smart Wisdom really helps people for whom English is a second language. And basically, Smart Wisdom replaces traditional note-taking. Mm-hmm. So it replaces handwritten note-taking or note-taking on an iPad or digital tablet. And it enables you to process the information in such a way that immediately your listening increases, your concentration increases, and your understanding of what you're listening to in real time increases. And this had been a game changer for me. I nearly got a distinction on my master's degree. They said it was one of the most remarkable things they'd ever seen. And I was someone who left school with really poor results. I knew I was stupid. Mm. People say to me, "Oh, but you weren't really," But in my head and in the bones of my body, I knew I was stupid. And that didn't leave me until after I got diagnosed with dyslexia, which was in my late 40s. So in my early 50s, that slowly started to slip away. But until then, it was always there.
Yeah. How confusing. Until Yes. How confusing to feel that, to have people say, well, no, you're not, but you feel it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's again that sort of expectation and reality, and the distance between it creates the conflict. And because Smart Wisdom then became my business, I thought, again, I don't want people to think, that I'm doing this book to pitch Smart Wisdom. So what I decided was I have an online course, which I sell. And I decided, right, anyone who reads the book, I'm going to give them a code in the book and they will have free access to the online course.
Wow.
So then sorry, you're going to say?
So generous. That's amazing.
But yeah, and what it does for me, it means that I can talk about Smart Wisdom without feeling that, a slight edge that I'm trying to sort of get business from, again, selling the book or talking about my experience with mental health or neurodiversity. And so it frees me, both in terms of selling the book and talking about Smart Wisdom, it completely frees me.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another thing which I haven't actually told you that I'm going to do. And this comes back and links back to the sort of success element of the project, which is putting it into the public sphere, is on the 1st of January, I'm going to do a 7-month mental health walk and talk all the way through the UK, all the way through Ireland. And I will spend 7 months on the road. But when I go to sort of like major towns and cities, my intention is to do talks and, book signings about mental health and neurodiversity. And again, any paid talks, the profits will go to these 4 mental health charities.
Oh, that's beautiful. Wow. So generous. Jonathan, you have to tell me, because I read about this, about getting your Irish passport and the thing you describe as achieved despite, since you're going to do this through the UK and Ireland. What was that achieved despite?
It's a really good point. And actually that has helped me enormously subsequently. So during COVID, anything and everything felt like a struggle. And there are certain things which I've always hated doing. And I think the dyslexia plays a part, is anything sort of heavily admin, anything that requires using technology, anything that requires research, but you don't quite know what you're looking for. All that would trigger, for me, the dyslexia, which would then trigger a feeling of being depressed.
Right. Low self-esteem, the whole thing.
Yeah. So, for example, applying for a new passport, and I would just just can't do this. Or doing my tax returns, Yeah. So I came up with this idea of, and I guess it was without realizing it, I wouldn't have used these words, but it was another way of building resilience. I thought, right, I'm going to tackle some projects now when I feel, in a really difficult space. And I'm just going to take it one step at a time, relax, deal with the frustrations, deal with not being able to solve things, deal with, taking time to write whatever you need to write. But I'm going to work through them. Mm-hmm. And if I can do it when I'm in a really poor mental state, therefore, one, I will achieve something anyway, so there'll be a sense of achievement. But 2, when my mental health is better, then I will be, much better equipped to do all sorts of things. And so one of them, there were 2, maybe 3 things that I did, but one of them was to apply for my Irish passport. So my grandmother is Irish, and post-Brexit, where we left the European Union, I wanted to sort of reconnect with the European Union and also to honour my Irish background. And so I thought, right, I'm going to apply for a passport. And I'd looked at it before and I just thought, oh my goodness, acquire all these birth, death, marriage certificates, and I have to do all this and that and And so I literally, and before I'd looked at it a couple of times and I just thought, no way. And then I thought, no, I'm going to do it. And I just sort of very slowly worked through it. I had to find 12 different birth, marriage, and death certificates. My grandmother had married 4 times. And I had no idea what the dates were. And so I was searching around on the birth, marriage, and death certificate register we have in the UK, et cetera, et cetera. And it took 2 months. Took 2 years to get my passport, but I did it in the end. And that's how I came up with Achieve Despite. And now when I'm sort of doing things that I find awkward, I just think, no, just relax. Achieve Despite. If you can do the Irish passport, when things were really tough, you can do this.
Oh, thank you. That's beautiful. Yeah, I'm sure you'll have a great audience for that too once you're in Ireland. Yes. It's just such a pleasure to hear about how you're turning your journey, the trials of living with mental illness, undiagnosed mental illness, diagnosed mental illness with, not feeling like you're in recovery from it and all of the stigma that goes with it, and then turning it into a way to serve and help other people, help organizations that, can help even more than just a reader, and helping readers also with, the Smart Wisdom. I think it's smartwisdom.com. I'll have you share everything before we end. But 2 major takeaway questions I'd love to ask as we wrap up. For therapists, what message do you have for therapists listening today, especially those supporting clients while also carrying their own mental health struggles? What message would you have for a therapist who's living with their own mental health issues and supporting clients?
A really good question. I suppose I'm thinking about what do I do when I do, because I do executive mentoring as well. What was I doing when I was really struggling, but I was, advising an executive on how to simplify their workload and develop plans and strategies. And the way I would do it is by just focusing on, and it comes back to this whole thing about relationships, but just focusing on the person that I was dealing with, making sure I had a plan of what I wanted to say beforehand. So that would help to start to create the focus. And the written plan probably beforehand of things to talk about or questions to ask is crucial to start to clear my mind and also to give me a focus. And the difference between having that plan and not having that plan is enormous.
Yes.
So that's what I would say is having, it doesn't need to take long. Usually I would do it in about 5 minutes, but is having a written plan of things that you might want to touch on. And actually, when the therapy session starts, you may talk about something completely different. That doesn't matter.
Right.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. And I think also the translation piece would be, in therapist jargon, we do have those plans. We have our case conceptualizations. We have, our notes from the session before of what were the highlights or what do we want to circle back to? What was that doorknob moment that we need to come back to? And primarily relational, being present. How do I just get present with that person in front of me? And then I think as you're sharing, reaching out, finding our own resources for ourselves and for our clients, anybody who's struggling with mental health. It's really hard to combat the internal stigma of, I'm going to make this call or I'm going to talk to someone or get professional help. And I'm really excited to read your book. Jonathan, share a little bit about where people can find you, and we'll be sure to link to everything in the show notes.
Sure. You said there were 2 questions.
Yes, 2 questions. Thank you. This one is just really basic, but, for someone struggling with mental health right now, not a therapist, just anybody, You've already given us so much encouragement and hope, but what words of encouragement or hope would you share with them?
What I would say is there's nothing abnormal about having mental health challenges. And the way to think about it is we apply two rules, or I certainly did. One rule for my brain and my mind, and another rule for the rest of my body. So even my eyes, which sit on the sort of front end of my brain, I applied one rule. Similarly, my ears, my throat, my mouth, completely my body. So if something goes wrong, I'm male, eventually I'll get round to going to see the doctor. But for me, there's no stigma about it. But I was applying a completely different set of rules to my brain in that I had to fix it myself. Whereas I wouldn't dream of trying to fix a sprained ankle or a dislocated arm. I wouldn't even consider doing that. So my advice is the brain is just another part of the body. It just happens to be one of the most complex parts, and therefore it defies logic that there would be nothing wrong. And so with the increases in understanding of neuroscience and psychotherapy and all sorts of psychiatry, we're starting to understand the brain, and we're starting to understand common brain illnesses, and we're able to give them names. So my advice is treat it like any other illness. And if you can, get professional medical advice or help.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you got me to ask that question. That's brilliant. Thank you. Yeah. So where can people find you on the internet, in social media?
Absolutely. So hopefully by the time this podcast goes live, I should have 2 new websites up. One is my author website, jonathankemp.com. Okay. So you'll be able to find out about the book, about me. I write a blog, or I'll be writing a blog about different aspects of mental health. You'll find out where to buy the book, and also about the 7-month walk as well. So I'll keep that posted there. But you'll also find my other social media links on there. And in terms of Smart Wisdom, it's smartwisdom.com. It's where you find out about Smart Wisdom. And as I say, the code for your free online course is in the book.
Beautiful. Oh, that's so exciting. I wish you all the best in the release of your book and the promotions and getting your walk and really this message across to so many people who need it. And I'm so grateful that there are people like you sharing their story, Jonathan, on this big level and touching so many lives, and even my audience here. So thank you so much.
I really appreciate you having me. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for listening to another episode of a Simple Therapy podcast. And until next time, keep it simple and keep showing up.
Thanks for listening to a Simple Therapy podcast. If today's episode resonated with you, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who needs it. Your support means so much. You can learn more or get in touch at asimpletherapypodcast.com. And remember, let's keep it simple and keep showing up.